Amazing. So, a formal hello and welcome. It's always so lovely to see you all here today. If you're joining us for the first time, there's a couple of names in the chat that I don't recognise. Hello, I'm Stacey Teece, Trust Fundraising Consultant at Money Tree Fundraising, and these monthly Let's Chat sessions are a space for us to think through the real challenges that we're facing in trust fundraising together. I want them to be honest conversations, practical insight, and absolutely no pressure. We're all here to work together. Like I always say, there's no silly questions, there's no silly experiences. We can all learn from each other. This month, I wanted to explore something that sits right at the heart of what we do, that journey from relationship to proposal. We've discussed before the strongest proposals are built on the research we do, the alignment we identify, and the relationships that we go on to build, long before we've even opened a new document to write anything down. But once we've laid those foundations, what are the tips and tricks we should be looking for to refresh our proposals? As always, like I always say, these sessions are richer for the experiences and the questions and the little tidbits that you put in the chat. So please do drop your thoughts and questions and experiences in the chat as we go along. And I'll try and keep an eye on that as we work through everything. What I wanted to start with is how everyone's, a little bit of how everyone's starting from today. So I thought, rather than doing a poll, we'll try a word cloud and see how this goes. So the question is, in one or two words, what's the hardest part of writing a trust proposal for you? It could be finding impact figures, it can be finding statistics about the beneficiaries that you support, could be working with those beneficiaries to try and get some data from them to be able to use. So what I've done is set up a menti.com. If you have your phone handy, that's the easiest way to do it, is from the QR code that's on the screen, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen. It's 47052266. Type in your words, and then we can watch the cloud build as we type our words in and see. So we've got character count, absolute nightmare, isn't it? Finding the time, impact is coming out quite strongly, data collection, getting case studies, keeping it fresh, absolutely, and having the time to keep it fresh as well, isn't it? Budget formations, suitability, word count is coming out again, character count, word counts coming out quite strongly on this one. Data collection, also something that's coming out. Again, finding stories, finding those case stories. Impact is coming out, knowing the funder. Time, that's another one that's coming out really strongly, finding the time to do all the things that you need to do, and even to sit down and refresh what you're doing is often quite tricky, isn't it? Trying to get the time to not just go, oh, we'll send out what we've already got. It's finding time to refresh that and get the new one. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for doing that for me, because it just gives me a clear picture of where everyone is. Hopefully we'll cover off some of these things today, but if not, this gives us a great start for things that we can potentially discuss in the future. And what I'll do, once everybody's responded, I will put a snapshot of this up on my LinkedIn, and then everybody can see what was coming up as some of the pressure points everybody feels. And if you're watching this back on the recording, I will leave the Menti word cloud open, so the same code will apply, and you can pop in and add your words to the word cloud, and then we can, when we get together again in June, we can have another look at this and see if we can cross off some of the things that people are finding tricky. So thanks so much for jumping on that so quickly and doing that for me. So what I also wanted to talk about before we dive into some of the proposal stuff is, did everyone see the new Larkhall fundraising return on investment report for 2026, which has just come out? If not, let me know and I can link it for you in the chat. The thing that matters most to us is the ROI for trusts and foundations, and that has dropped, which I don't think any of us will find surprising, from £9.20 return on investment for every £1 spent to in 2025 to £8.38 in 2026. So that's a 9% decrease. And I'm not showing this to be disheartening. Trust fundraising, if you ranked it and everything else, is still going to come out as one of the strongest returning income streams in the sector. But I think a 9% drop is significant. And it reflects something that we've been talking about for a while, doesn't it? That it feels harder to get a yes from trust. And this kind of fits with what we've been thinking. We know the landscape's more competitive, particularly in some sectors. Funders are receiving more applications than ever without the corresponding money available, particularly as we talked about in some sectors. And then when demand outstrips that supply, success rates come under pressure, and that's why we see this. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing the link to the Lark Owl ROIs report. That's really helpful for you. I was just going to pop on and do that, so you saved me a job to do that. And thank you, Maria, for sharing the the word cloud, sorry, in the chat as well. That's really helpful for everybody to see. And like I said, once everybody's completed it, I will share it on my LinkedIn as well, so you can hop over there and have a look. And going back to the ROI, I think cold pipeline success rate, we've talked about this a lot as well, sits at 1 in 10, which means statistically 9 out of every 10 cold applications doesn't get funded. So I think that is then reflected in this return on investment. And I also think you have to take all of these figures with a pinch of salt. It's a small demographic of charities that responded to the survey, and it's from a number of organisations that range from small to large. So that it's hard to be comparable for whatever it is where you fit within that broad construct of where all of this data has come from. So we always take data with a pinch of salt, and it's always worth having a look at your own ROIs internally and seeing where you are. It's just something that's meant to be as a benchmark, isn't it, for us to have a look at, to see where we are, to see where we fit. And I think that's important to do, to be able to have a look at what we're putting out there and what we're doing. But don't be disheartened by it if yours ROI is a lot less than this. It is absolutely just for us to have a look at in the wide sector data that we always have a look at as trusts fundraisers. So that 1 in 10 for cold, that is a really cold pipeline success rate. Warm relationships with strong alignment and well-crafted proposals really change those odds. And that's what we're looking for, isn't it? A portfolio that has those warmer people that we can, warmer trust, sorry, that we can prioritize. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about today. This data isn't here to discourage us. It's here to help us work more intentionally, to be able to focus our time and energy where it's more likely to make a difference. So does that ROI resonate with anyone? Is that what you would expect it to be when you're on the ground? Is that what you're experiencing? I know that some of you are doing exceptionally well with your trust fundraiser, and I know that other sectors are really struggling, and that, I look at the trust fundraising hub daily and we see some great successes come through on there. But I also see when people go, we haven't had any yeses, we feel like we're going through a dry spell, and that can be really disheartening. So how does this return on investment stat feel for you? How does it feel for you and your organisation? I'd love to know your thoughts if you want to share them in the chat with us. I'll just check that we haven't had any questions or anything while people are thinking about how they think about that thing. Erica says we're not really measured in this way. Is that something that you've chosen not to do? Is it something, Erica, that the trustees haven't asked you to do? It's something that you've not had a look at? I always think looking at your ROI is always worth a little look at, because it kind of helps see where you are in the grand scheme of things, and make sure that you're not over investing in an income stream that isn't producing the results for you. It might help you to see, how much time and effort you want to invest in that income stream. Reese says my ROI is struggling, so few results, but I've been tasked with only fundraising for core. Okay, yeah, so that would make your return on investment lower, wouldn't it, Ruth, if you're only fundraising for core, because those opportunities are definitely fewer and far between than project fundraising in trust. Yeah, that's really tricky. And Holly says probably about right when including very, very cold direct mailings to smaller trusts, nomination draws. Yeah, if you're doing some direct mail work with trusts and you're not kind of going for the model that's relationship building and all about alignment, then you would expect your ROI to be lower. Holly, how would you suggest we go about this? There are so many people and salaries involved in the different bids I work on. I think it's looking at the main cost of what you're doing. So your salary, Holly, and then a proportion of anybody that helps. So a proportion of finance, a proportion of your operations, service delivery team should go towards that as well. If you look at how much time they're spending on helping you with that bid, so maybe 5%, 10%, depending on how much you get them involved with your bids, and then any other costs that you have for that income stream, and then look at how much you're bringing in through it to work out your ROI. Nothing is ever set in stone, is it? It's always just a guide to show us where we are. And then when we get figures like this, we can look at them and put them into context of our own organization, and how that feels, and does it feel right, and does it feel like we're in the right kind of place. Places that I've worked, sometimes they don't ask for ROI. Sometimes I will look at that for myself because it helps when stats like this come up to just kind of eyeball it and benchmark it from my own self. Some organisations I've worked for, it's been a stipulation by the trustees that we calculate return on investment, because they want to have a look at how those income streams are going, and should we put more money, more time, more workforce behind the things that maybe might need a boost if we're doing legacies, for example, and something's not quite working there, and maybe we need more manpower. It's another good way of looking at, are we spending money in the right place? Do we need to put more money into this to help it do more? Do we need more people in that team to help you to do more, even if that reduces your ROI a little bit? Sometimes it can help you uncover some of those things looking at ROI. But I think if your organization doesn't do it, it's not going to hold you back in any way at all. I just always find looking at the statistics around the work that I'm doing, including it in your KPIs, it's just another way to have a look at what you're doing. Fantastic. So we spent the last month talking about relationships. Now I want to bring that into the proposal itself, because I think the two are so interlinked and it's so important. When you've done the relationship building before you write, when you've attended those Meet the Funder events, you've had a brief conversation with a trustee or an admin or the program officer, you've researched a funder's priorities in real depth, and so things that aren't necessarily in those guidelines because you've had those conversations, you've been to those Meet the Funder events. You know what the trustees really care about most. You know what they've been funding recently because you've looked at their accounts, and you might even know why. The language they use to describe their priorities. It's all over their website. It's in those conversations that you've had. It's in that Meet the Funder that you've had. It's in their accounts. And what questions they might ask of you, of your project, of your program, of the work that you do. And all of that should be reflected in your proposal. Not in a way that feels really forced or feels like you're name dropping, but really naturally, because you're trying to demonstrate that you understand what the funder's trying to achieve and how your proposal reflects that understanding. So, for example, if you've attended a Meet the Funder event and a trustee mentioned they're particularly interested in long-term community impact, then you need to make sure your proposal speaks directly to that. Use their language, show them that you were listening to everything that they said. That's the difference between a proposal that feels tailored and one that feels generic. If you have a template that you use, and we all do, don't we, as trust fundraisers, we do have a basic template, and then we work from that template to show how we fit the funder's priorities. If you don't do those adjustments, if you don't do that tailoring, that's when it feels generic. and funders can absolutely tell that you've just copied and pasted, their name and address on it, and that you've sent that out. And if you've done all that great work to make sure that you've built that relationship, that you've pulled everything together, you don't want to fall at the proposal stage because you just haven't tailored it to all that amazing stuff that you've learned about them. So it's making sure that you keep that in mind as you're writing your proposal. So has anybody had a moment where something you've learned from a funder conversations directly shaped your proposal and made a difference? I'd love to hear some stories about a little bit of information that you might have gleaned. So please do feel free to share anything that you've found really useful in those conversations that's helped you just shape that proposal, and made sure that you've included it. Just checking the chat. No one having good stories. I'm trying to think if I've had a good story before or something. I mean, I've had lots of really interesting chats with trustees, where you come across that little bit of information. Like you find out. Once I found out, like their granddaughter was doing a veterinary training degree, and he was saying, how expensive it was, and how much she was enjoying it. So I used to work for a veterinary charity, so I used that information then to send the trustees a proposal about some of our vets and their training and their ongoing personal development, and how much it means to their to their training, and it meant to all the pets that we were supporting. And it was successful. So you never know where that tiny little bit of information, when you're having those chats, is going to take you. Eric says, yes, applied to a funder who only funds under 18s and with for 16 to 25s. So I called them to check if we'd be eligible, and they said we would, as long as we directly spoke about our impact for under 25s. Absolutely. And you might, if you hadn't have had that conversation, dismiss that trust because you didn't cover the upper range of what they were looking for. So as long as you can demonstrate that impact for under 18s, which you do for your 16 to 18-year-olds, absolutely great example. Holly says, currently working on an app that asks for partner organisations. Thankfully, their accounts show we work formally, informally with several of their funded charities. So those are being mentioned at the top. Absolutely. That's a great use of someone's accounts, isn't it? And having a look at that information, and using that to your advantage. We have to use what we can get, don't we? That's a brilliant example. Erica says we were successful with the grant and they funded the full project amount rather than the proportion we asked for. That's a great outcome, Erica. Well done. Maria, I recently spoke to a funder to find out that although they had a maximum application income, they waived it for hospices, although they did not advertise it. They told me exactly what I could apply for, so completely tailored the proposal. Absolutely. That's a brilliant, sometimes we can be a bit fearful and maybe even resentful of finding the time to make some of these inquiries, don't we? But actually look at all the great things that have come out of just taking a couple of moments to pick up the phone, sometimes even rather than dropping them an email. Reed says, not a conversation as such, but I saw it was a funder's 75th giving anniversary and I congratulated them on it in my cover email. They were really pleased. I got the grant and it was a cold app. Absolutely. It's those, I always called them the little I saw these and thought of you moments. And sometimes we forget, I think, that the trustees behind these trusts are people and they appreciate those kind of little things where you've thought about them, you've seen something, and you put it out there into the world. I think that's a great use of your cover email to just drop that little note in there. Laura says, a funder has steered us to align our proposal to a different one of their priorities when the one we thought we aligned with. Absolutely. So having that conversation has just helped you open up a different point of view of where your project might fit with what they're looking for. And it might be that they really like what you're doing, and where you thought you fit, they might be oversubscribed or not funding as much to that particular fund, whereas actually they want to fund you or would like to fund the money to be able to fund you, and so have steered you to a part that they might have internally that might be able to fund you and fit you better. It says, definitely, I sent a letter of introduction, then was invited to submit a funding proposal following a Zoom call with the Trust Secretary. It was really useful to understand what a reasonably sized ask was and what areas of work they were most likely to find attractive. Absolutely, great example. Laura says, having a conversation before we can help with knowing what level to pitch at for the budget. We had a chat with a trustee and realised they were willing to give us quite a lot more than we were currently applying for, which is really good to know. Brilliant. And Holly says, my latest successful proposal featured a really great relationship with the head of grants. She gave us feedback on our proposal ahead of the deadline and has supported how we shape the portion of the proposal to really speak to the trustees. Fantastic. Helen says, postcode trust meet the funder events are really helpful. For example, last year they emphasised that there were 2 parts to each question, and it's really important to answer both parts within their very tight word count. Absolutely. And sometimes it's these things that we miss, isn't it, when we're trying to do those applications and trying to get everything absolutely right. So going to that meet the funder, Helen just re-emphasised it for you, that you needed to be really mindful of that. Beth says, when we called a funder before applying, they told us they were especially interested in projects that were about learning from beneficiaries. Our project included this, so we focused a lot more on it than in the proposal than we otherwise would have, and got the grant. Amazing. Zainab says, Postcode Trust, are they open to any charities interested in applying? Have a look at their website, Postcode Trust. They have really, really good detailed information about who's applicable to apply, who's eligible, sorry, to apply. And also they do some really good Meet the Funder events, as Helen says. So if you can, try and go along to one of them, and then you can ask those questions. Sarah is just asking Marie who the funder was. I'll leave that to you, Marie, whether you want to disclose that or not. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. Those are some really, really positive stories of how getting that information and doing all that relationship building before you even put pen to paper or start typing in the application form can really help you shape your proposal. So if anybody is feeling a bit worried about doing that, about reaching out to make those connections, picking up that phone, hopefully these stories will help empower you to be able to do that, because it really, really does help you shape your proposals. That little bit of information, like the 75th anniversary, little things like that can show that you really listened, that you are tuned into that funder, that you understand them. Even small things can really, really make the difference. And you'll be surprised how little people are actually doing that. So the more you do it, and the more that you focus in on some of those things, the more you will stand out in that stack of applications that they'll be receiving. So I think also there's as well as making sure your proposals are really well aligned and you're using all that great juicy information that you have, I think we can look at our proposals a different way. I think what we often forget is that because trusts are so busy, and particularly at the moment, we know trusts are receiving more applications than they can cope with. Our proposals are almost certainly skim read first. So a quick skim for fit and alignment. Does this feel like us? Is this what we fund? Does this organisation seem credible? Have I heard of them? And if it doesn't pass that initial skim, it often doesn't get a deeper read at all. And even when it does, it's more frequently an administrator reading it in detail, summarising your work for the trustees, who might never ever see your full proposal. They might just see a snapshot of what you've written, but that's the administrator's summary and their interpretation of your work. So what that means is your key messages need to be absolutely impossible to miss, not buried in paragraph 4, right there at the top of your proposal, immediately clear. Lots of trust fundraisers, including me, use an executive summary at the beginning of their proposals, which summarises the ask, makes sure it's in your words, how your organisation, how you speak about what you do, and how you want it to be presented to the trustees. So administrators love you because you've done their work for them. You've put really clearly at the top of your proposal, only has to be 2 paragraphs, a really good, impactful summary of your work, what you want them to fund, how much, the timescale over which that they will fund, 12 courses over a 12-month period, what the impact of that funding will be. It will help people's mental health, it will help 20 people access mental health support, and whatever it is for you, is all really, really clear in those top 2 paragraphs under an executive summary. The administrator can pick up those 2 paragraphs and pop them into their summary for the trustees to have a look at it. They're happy because you've done that work for them. You're happy because they're using the exact wording that you want them to. So next time you're going to submit an application, if you don't use an executive summary, I would absolutely have a look at that and see whether you could put an executive summary in there. I think it's absolutely worth testing with a few of your applications to see whether that makes any difference. If you don't want to do an executive summary, just have a look really objectively and read your first opening 2 or 3 paragraphs as if you were a funder seeing your organisation for the first time, and ask yourself, is the need really clear? Is it obvious who we are and what we do? And is there a compelling reason for the person reading your proposal to keep reading, other than they're obliged to because you've submitted it to them? And not all of them will do. If the answer to any of those is no, that's your starting point to look at refreshing your proposals. That's a good place to start. Some of the things that came up is finding the time to do it, because sometimes it can feel like the task is really, really overwhelming. But if you start by doing that really quick exercise, if I was to skim read it, if I was to have a look at my first 2 or 3 paragraphs, would there be a lot of things there that would make them want to read? Do they get most of the information they need from there, and they can find out everything else by more in depth, and all this good statistics and case studies if they keep going ahead? I've just seen a couple of yeah, I love an executive summary, Liz. I think it's a really good thing to do, just to make it really clear and really easy. Erica, most of the apps I've done have been forms. How would you suggest we pass the skim test with forms instead? You really can't. They're asking you very specific questions, so they can use those as a comparison. They're looking at proposals in a completely different way once you're filling in an application form. They are asking specific questions because they want to know the answers to those questions. So you're presenting your information in a very different way. It's just making sure that you're being really clear and really concise, and that you're answering really upfront whatever that question is asking you. Now, don't waffle for ages. Put the answer to the question top and center so they can see it. And then if there's anything you want to add to back up that question, you can absolutely fill that out, but make sure that you've answered that question, you've given them the answer at the very, very top. But there is no kind of skim test with an application form, because they're asking you those questions for very specific reasons. So it's a little bit different. Fiona, would you do this as part of your cover letter or an extra to sit after the letter before the proposal? I would do it at the top of my proposal. I would include it as part of my 2-page, 3-page proposal, executive summary right at the top, called executive summary. So if a trust administrator is looking at it, they can absolutely know, oh, this is the summary I need to pick up and put in for the trustees to have a look at. When I'm doing a covering letter, I always reinforce everything in my covering letter, and do all the usual things of offering them to come and have a look at them, ask any questions if they have any. But the executive summary, even if they don't look at your covering letter, the executive summary will do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, because it's front and center of your proposal, is part of your proposal at the very, very top at the beginning. how do your executive summaries differ between cold and warm trusts, Rebecca asked? So if I have a warm trust that I'm writing to, I've got a really great relationship with them, I will absolutely reference that in my executive summary. I will reference any information that I know, the way that we're aligned, the way that we fit together in my executive summary, any gifts that they've given in the past, and a quick sentence to say, you supported us last year with this, it helped us do this, and now we want you to help us do this and expand on it and change it, and do all those good things. So really, your executive summary in that case for warm is just showing how warm you are and how well you've worked together before. All that information we've talked about, that all those great things in the stories that we heard that we know and we've learned about, I would absolutely put in your executive summary. Anything you want them to focus on, anything you want them to go away remembering, should go in your executive summary at the top. If you're writing to cold ones and you don't have that same connection, you are then highlighting how you can demonstrate that you're aligned. So that Mrs. Smith's charitable trust supports education, and our work is aligned with your priorities because we support education. We do this, and this. So you're using what you do know to demonstrate that alignment. But I would definitely, if it was for a warm trust, I would definitely be highlighting why we are warm, what those connections is, if it's that they've supported us in the past, how that support has helped, what the impact of that support was, and how a new grant could help you do even more. So it's a great place to put things like that. Holly says, I was on some training that mentioned Hemingway app, which helps look at the reading age of applications, because we all feel proud of our lovely, impactful storytelling sentences, when actually, if you're only scan reading, that's not translating. That's a really good point, Holly. That's another good way of having a look at it. And you can do it if you use Microsoft. You can look at it for reading age on the Microsoft. I can't remember off the top of my head how you do that. But there's definitely, because I've used it a couple of times to have a look at readability. But that's another great way of having a look at it. If what does my daughter always say? Like if a 10-year-old can read it and understand it, then that's something anybody can get their heads behind and kind of understand it really, really well, because you never know who's reading these applications to you. So that's another good way of having a look at it. Sarah says, can I ask, if there's no word count, how many pages would you suggest for a grant application? 2 pages have been so difficult to include all the costings, measurables, etc., in such a short space. I'm not sure if I'm limiting myself unnecessarily. I think it always used to be 2 pages. Used to be the kind of standard across trust fundraising. You need to try and cram everything in 2 pages. But I think if we're trying to demonstrate those relationship things that we know, trying to put in really good case studies, trying to include that comprehensive budget, I think we can push that to 3 pages. I wouldn't necessarily go to 4, because if you're thinking about the trustees having limited time to have a look at these things, and they open up your kind of pack of letters and things that you've sent through, a covering letter and then a 4-page proposal can seem quite a lot and quite overwhelming for them to get through. So I would try and keep it to 3 if you could, but I think going down the old-fashioned route of trying to fit in it all into 2 pages, I mean, if you can, amazing. I think that will definitely help the trustees looking at what you're sending through, if you're not sending through reams and reams and reams of paper. But I think we'd probably being a bit hard on ourselves to try and fit all of that into 2 pages. So I would push it to 3, but I'd be mindful of going over anything more than 3, unless you're doing a two-page proposal and your budget's on the 3rd page, is probably how I would try and fit it in. But if we want to do some really good storytelling, we want to demonstrate that alignment and the warmness that we've spent all this doing, I think, we're limiting ourselves to 2 pages. So I think you'd be fine to push it to 3, but I'd be really mindful about going. And again, think about the skim test. If they're really interested in what you're doing, because you've got that executive summary at the top, and then they want to read more, they've got the wealth of information that they can have a look through. But remember not to be too much. We don't want pages and pages and pages for them to have a look through, because their time's still really limited. And I think that's how I would look at it. Would you call it an executive summary, Holly asks, or keep it as an opening paragraph? I always call it an executive summary. It's language that's been used in trust fundraising for a while. Trustees, administrators are familiar with executive summaries. We often see it in reports, don't we? Strategies and things like that. So I think it signals to the potential funder that this is a summary of everything that's in the proposal, and if they want to lift it, this is where they should be looking to lift that information with, and it gives them a good feeling about what the rest of the proposal is about. So I would call it an executive summary. I've never had any pushback on that, but it's what you feel comfortable with. Being able to put, it's just you want to do that signaling, don't you, to whoever's reading it, that this is kind of where all the juicy information is. If you were only going to look at one thing, look at this. So it's whatever you feel comfortable with naming that, I suppose. But executive summary has always worked for me. Rebecca, I do the same with budget. If it's a longer out, put costings on the third page. Yeah, I try not to kind of squeeze it in. And it's as lovely as putting lots of photographs in as well are, if you've got limited amount to be able to put in, because you don't want to give them too much to read, a few really well placed photos are great, particularly if you're putting in a case study, some stories, some good quotes. But I tend to use the words and the quotes in different colours, and so they stand out rather than putting lots and lots of pictures in, unless they're really, really relevant to the story that you're trying to tell, the project that you're trying to showcase. So I hope that really helps. I think it's really interesting to think, when you start looking at your proposals as if they're being skim read, it puts a different perspective on them, and things that you might include, things that you won't include might change because of that factor. And then I think this is another good thing, talking about executive summaries, is to lead with your ask. Don't be afraid to put how much you're asking for into that executive summary at the very, very beginning, because it signals to the trust, we absolutely need this funding, and we're not shy about asking for this funding. We've done all this great research, we've built up a relationship with you in some cases, so here's what we're going to ask for, and here's how it's aligned. I always put it in the executive summary, and then also put it at the bottom when I'm talking about budgets and the impact that funding and that trust, the legacy that trust can leave us by making a grant can have. I always put it twice, so if it kind of just reinforces it at the end of the proposal with some extra kind of floweriness over that impact, and really making it seem like they're making a legacy to us, and what that will do for us in the long term, and what it will do for the beneficiaries in the long term. So don't be scared about putting it. There was a lot of chat kind of when I first started in trust fundraising 20 odd years ago, about not being so bold and not being so upfront with making that ask. But I absolutely think if you've done all of this research and you are really, really well aligned, then there's no reason why you shouldn't put that at the very, very front of your proposal. Absolutely not. Laura says, how do you weigh up asking for the full amount that you need versus asking for a small amount that feels more likely the funder will be on board with? So you need to have a look at how much that potential funder is making in grants. So either they're really upfront with that on their website, or you have a look through their accounts and you have a look at kind of what other organizations they're making those grants to, and at what kind of figure. I often do that, look at the ones that are similar to the organization I'm looking to make that application for, and then look at an average, and then use that average to center around my ask. And you can do that by either packaging up what you have. So I often use a cost per head model, if you can do so. If your total costs of the project are £10,000, how much does that cost per head for all the beneficiaries that are coming through and using your services? And then looking at, say, if you make a grant of £1,000, you'll be helping X amount of people to gain access to all these services, and this is what the impact of that will be. So really, it's You can absolutely put the full amount of the budget into your proposal, but then if you're doing that cost per head model, or cost per course, or cost per project, cost per workshop, cost per outreach, whatever it is that you have, it helps break that down into smaller chunks and makes the potential trust funder feel like they're actually going to make an impact and a dent on that wider amount that you could potentially need. So I would find out how much that potential funder is making in grants first, because you don't want to go in too high or too low. You want to try and pitch it. You don't want to leave money on the table, do we, as trust fundraisers? We want to make sure we're pitching it at the right amount. And then look at if you could do a cost per whatever it is model to break that budget down into smaller amounts. Or it could be that your workshop delivery costs £10,000, and that's exactly how much their average gift is. So you could go for, your £10,000 could help support the delivery of the entire delivery of our workshops for the next 12 months. It all depends on how much your project is, how you can break it down, and how much that funder is looking to make, what their average gift side is. So it's always worth having a look at that to help you weigh up how much to ask for. And then one of the things I see that's become a little bit more common, and I had an interesting conversation about this, that they hadn't realised that the looking at impact versus activity had changed. That, at one point with trust funders, activity was the buzzword. We always describe our activities really beautifully, our workshops, our outreach sessions, support groups, how many, how often, how many people are coming along to them. We see it all throughout our social medias, on our website. We're really, really good at talking about our activity. But we can often, and I think this is where it's changed, we forget to describe what changes as a result of all of those amazing things that we're doing in our organizations. So if you have a look at the example that's on the screen now, so the output, the activity, is 120 people will attend our mental health workshops. Great, that sounds great. That's lots of people coming through. But the impact that the trusts want to know about and what to spend their money on is 120 people will develop coping strategies, report reduced anxiety, and feel more connected to their community. That's the impact. That's the legacy that you are promoting to that trust, that their grant will leave. That's what they're really interested in now. That's what they want to see. It's exactly the same project, but it's a completely different picture and a completely different way of looking at it. And I still see lots of trust fundraisers just talking about activity and not looking at impact. They're not investing in your workshops. They are, in a roundabout way, but they're investing in the change that follows. And that's all about making that legacy pitch. With your support, we will address your priorities of X, Y, and Z by doing this. We know that you want to support mental health in the under 18s, and here is how we do it. We know that's what you want to do. Here is how we will do that. It signals that you've done your homework, all that great stuff we were talking about before, all those bits of information that we've gleaned. It shows that it's not a generic application that has been sent to everyone who we think who might say yes, and that it's a little bit aligned to. You're showing you've clearly thought out and carefully thought about what that funder is specifically wanting to do, what their priorities are, and that they are a right impact they're the right partner for your work. So Joanna says, when you make your impact statements in the application, you have to be confident you can report on, evidence the impact at the end of the grant. Absolutely. And that might be, we have done 120 people have attended our workshops, and here's the surveys that we've done at the beginning. We've got our baseline data for people at the beginning of our workshop courses, and then here is where they felt at the end of that workshop courses. It's about working across your teams, isn't it? Working with your delivery partners, your operations team, whoever it is that is on the ground running your activities and services, and making sure that you can evidence that impact. It absolutely is important, but talking about that impact in your proposals is also really, really important. Would you say impact and outcomes are pretty much the same thing? Um, yes, in a way. Impact is more around what um what the long-term benefits of the work that you're doing with your beneficiaries is. Outcomes and outputs are more, I would say, are more akin with each other, and that is 120 people attended our mental health workshop. But I think it's a kind of, it's a funny one. Outcomes, it depends how they talk about it from the funders kind of side, and you have to mirror that language, don't you? But yeah, I think impacts and outcomes can pretty much be the same thing. It just depends on how you put it, but outputs are definitely um the activities that you're doing and how many of those activities that you're doing. But either way, whether you're talking about them as impacts or talk about them as outcomes, it's really important that you include that and not just focus on your delivery. It's looking at, like I said, that long-term legacy that that grant can make for your beneficiaries. And leading on from that, I wanted to pick up on a really brilliant question that came in ahead of today's session from Holly, who's been thinking about leading more with impact stories in external comms and proposals. So Holly asked, where have people seen success from making this shift? And how have they worked with their comms colleagues to influence it? I love this question because it takes that impact conversation beyond the proposal itself into something much bigger. It's like I was saying before, we're really good. And if you looked at any of our websites and our social media and took a snapshot of that at the minute, we'd be great at talking about our activity. We've done so many workshops. We're holding this today. Please come along to this. You know, we're really good at that. What we're not so good about is talking about the change that we are making, the impact of the work that we've had. Show them that through those specific stories that you have, real moments, something that makes that funder feel, not just understand the difference that their grant was make. And if that impact story is then showing up in your social media, on your website, on your own LinkedIn profiles, it just resonates even more and makes that story even more compelling because you're all saying the same things and showing the impact of what you're doing, not just the activity that you're carrying out, which is so worthwhile, but it's not showing that impact. And as more trusts move to unsolicited applications and they're going out there and they're doing their own research, it's about becoming findable. So if you've got really good impact demonstrated across your social media, across anything you're talking about, public facing, all these great things that you're doing, it helps you become more discoverable because you're putting it all out there. You're using funded language. If you can do that even more better, if you can reflect the funder language that you're using, if you know there's a particular funder that you want to go after, but they don't accept unsolicited applications, if you can reflect some of those things in the language that you're using externally, even better, because you'll pop up in any searches that they're doing and research that they're doing to look for organizations like yours that will align with what they're looking for. It all becomes part of how your organization is known and how it's trusted, which brings you to the attention of those funders. So I think it's really important to be talking about impact and leading with impact rather than activity in everything that you do across the organization. And I think trying to get people on board, please do put, if anyone has had experience of this, please do share in the comments. Working with your comms colleagues is something I hear about a lot, where marketing and fundraising work really well together is where I've seen the most successes. Lots of organizations now are going for head of comms and fundraising as one, so there is that joined up thinking. Trust fundraising often feels like it's working in a silo. And the impact stories are sitting way over there with comms program, and you don't always have easy access to. I would try and I found these things that have worked for me before, to have a conversation with the comms team about that. Be really specific about what you need and why you need it, not just have an impact story. I need a story about a beneficiary whose life's changed because of X project, because this funder will fund something to do with that. So I want to demonstrate that, be really explicit about what you want so they know what they're looking for. I find that works best for me. I've had some good responses from that in the past. Build a regular channel for sharing those impact stories, even if it's just a simple shared folder, if it's a monthly email, if it's part of your wider fundraising team meeting, if you can go along to the comms team meeting, any way that you can have that two-way conversation about what you need, then that's brilliant. Fiona says, my experience is that comms teams completely understand the need for impact. The challenge is getting the impact from the operations team. Absolutely. That can often also be a challenge as well. I've worked in organizations where kind of the operations team has gatekept the beneficiaries because they don't want them to be disturbed by someone from the comms team or the fundraising team asking them lots of questions. And in that case, I've involved the operations team in that conversation and tried to show them how we need those impacts, why we need them. We won't be able to continue running these services unless we have some of this information from our beneficiaries to be able to use. Bring the operations team into that conversation. I've used the operations team sometimes to go out and have those conversations on my behalf. They've enjoyed having those conversations with the beneficiaries because it helps them to see, all the good stuff they're doing is having a really good impact on those people. So it's trying to open up those lines of communication. I really understand that's not as easy as I'm making it sound, but it's trying to be open, honest, have those conversations, bring everyone to the table, and pushing it up higher in the chain if you're not getting what you need. And trying to show that, that understanding of this is why we really need it, and I'm not getting the cooperation that I need to be able to do all these things to make my trust fundraising better. But I absolutely, Holly, think that everyone should be talking about impact across the organisation. It should be front and centre, not just about activity. It's a really good way to make yourself be discoverable, particularly like I said, for those trusts that don't accept unsolicited applications. You're really trying to make yourself stand out there and trying to make yourself discoverable. So I would absolutely agree that leading with impact is a really good place to be, and would put you ahead of a lot of organizations that just aren't doing that yet. So you would be at the forefront of doing it. So I would absolutely say go ahead and do that. Fantastic. Okay. Just before we finished, I wanted to talk about what happens after you submit because your proposal, because putting it in isn't the end, is it? We know that it isn't. So during that waiting period, if you already have a warm relationship, keep in touch with the trust where you can. A brief check-in is fine where it's appropriate. Hope that you got the proposal. When are the trustees meeting? Hope they have a nice meeting. I look forward to hearing from you after. If there's any news that's relevant from your organisation that pops up in between you submitting that application, again, feel free to reach out to them and let them know that something's changed. I've just wanted to let you know that we've added another thing into our project, that we're now doing it here instead of doing it here. Whatever that change is, there's no reason why you can't reach out and just check them in. You might have a new partner that you're working with that's really worth sharing. There's absolutely no reason why you can't reach out and do that. And then when the outcome arrives, whether it's a yes or a no or a silence, I think if it's a yes, that's brilliant. That's the beginning of the stewardship. This isn't the end of the relationship. This is where the hard work begins. How you report, how you communicate, how you make them feel about the difference their grants made. That's what determines whether they come back. If it's a no, and we get them more than we'd like, that's not the end either. How you respond to that rejection shapes how the funder thinks about you next time. We're going to explore this more in depth in June, how to handle rejection gracefully and keep that door open. But it's worth thinking about what do you do if you get a no? Is that it? there's nothing more. You just update everything you need to do, but you don't respond back. That's something we're going to explore next month. So it's just thinking about what do you do when you get that yes, no, and even silence. Silence is information too. So when you get nothing, for me, after 6 months, then I would not remove the prospect from my pipeline, but I would remove the ask. I'm probably not going to get a response from that. Sometimes we get surprised, don't we? In 8 to 12 months, 24 months down the line, suddenly we'll get a yes. I think the longest I've ever had was 18 months after submitting an application, because they'd moved premises, and so they hadn't got round to looking at all of everything, so it took them 18 months to process the proposal, and it was a yes, which was a good thing after 18 months, but I had completely written them off by that point. But even if you get silence, then it's worth having a look at their accounts when they next publish them and have a look. Okay, where why didn't we get anything from there? Oh, okay, they were focusing on younger children, and we were secondary school age children this time around. So that's where where we didn't get, but there could be something there for us next, because they do say they talk about it. So it's looking at those little things and using all the information to just look at what your next bit might be. Eric says we're currently in the Tesco token voting, which my predecessor applied for in November 2024. Yes, but you never know when these things might come off, do you? Or what might suddenly come through. It's ridiculous, isn't it, really? So let's have a look. When is the next Let's Chat? So our next Let's that's hard to say. Our next Let's Chat Trust Fundraising is the 23rd of June at 12 noon. The registration for that is already open, so please do feel free after this session to pop over and register for that, where we will be talking a bit more about rejections and feedback and keeping the door open and how to keep ourselves resilient. And then if you're interested, don't forget that we have the huddle over in the Trust Fundraising Facebook group on Thursday at 11 a.m. It's just a great place for you all to come together and work on things that you might be stuck on, and we can work on those things together. I'm going to be bringing my Garfield Weston proposal to have a look at in that session. So I do hope you'll come and join us there. But thank you so much for all your amazing input today. It's just really, really helped to shape the conversation. Have a wonderful rest of the week and a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you in June, if not on Thursday, for the huddle. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.